Good evening and thank you for joining us for another week of Weather Extra. I'm meteorologist Jillian Grace. We begin tonight with our top weather story, Hurricane Ian, the storm who will go down as one of the most powerful hurricanes to have ever hit the United States. Now, Ian became a tropical depression early in the morning back on Friday, September 23rd off the coast of South America, and then quickly strengthened into a tropical storm later that night. Ian would then spend last weekend slowly moving through the Caribbean Sea, gaining some strength every day. Ian came close but stayed far enough west of Jamaica, which spared the island from seeing any flash floods and any major wind damage. But as Ian moved further away from Jamaica, it strengthened into a Category 1 hurricane early Monday, September 26. Ian would then approach the Grand Cayman Islands and bring storm surge, strong winds, and heavy rainfall. Thankfully, Ian again stayed enough west of the island, which kept them safe from any catastrophic damage. Now, Hurricane Ian continued to intensify, approaching Cuba. Only 12 hours after becoming a Category 1 hurricane, Ian would then strengthen into a Category 2. And only 30 minutes after that, became a major Category 3 hurricane with winds of 125 miles per hour. Now, Hurricane Ian tore into western Cuba early Tuesday, September 27th, killing 2 people and knocked out power to the entire country, leaving 11 million people without electricity. Ian made landfall in Cuba's Pinar del Rio province, where officials evacuated 50,000 people. The U.S. National Hurricane Center said Cuba suffered impacts from significant wind and storm surge when Ian struck. And after tearing through western Cuba, Ian moved northeast, but still managing to gain strength as it now trekked through the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Meanwhile, on land, Florida police officers were going door to door, making sure people knew what was coming their way.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Good.
Good. Hey, you're in a mandatory evacuation.
Over 2.5 million people were ordered to evacuate ahead of Hurricane Ian. Traffic for miles as everyone headed away from the coast while Ian was growing stronger in the Gulf. Early Wednesday morning, back on September 28th, Ian became a very powerful Category 4 hurricane with winds of 140 miles per hour. Now, unfortunately, Ian would continue to intensify as it inched closer to Florida's coast. Officials warning that this storm could be the worst in Florida's history.
This is significant because what this means is that Floridians are going to experience the impacts from this storm for a very long time.
Now, Hurricane Ian slammed into Florida's southwestern coast on Wednesday, September 29th. Ian made landfall during the afternoon at the island of Cayo Costa, which was a strong Category 4 hurricane at the time of landfall. It had winds of 150 miles per hour, only 7 miles per hour short of Category 5 status, the highest status a storm can reach. Across southwestern Florida, Ian tore apart homes and buildings, left residents stranded, and storm surge flooded communities and caused power outages for more than 2.5 million residents.
This could be the deadliest hurricane in Florida's history. The numbers are still unclear, but we're hearing early reports of what may be substantial loss of life.
Now, Ian dealt a direct blow to Fort Myers, Cape Coral, Sanibel, and Naples. Millions were ordered to evacuate, but hundreds of people decided to ride out the storm, and they were believed to be trapped in their homes after Ian stormed through. Now, one Florida State Fire Marshal said Hurricane Ian is likely the largest natural disaster in Florida history. Homes and streets across the southwestern Florida were underwater as heavy rain and storm surge overflowed cities. Fort Myers recorded storm surges of up to 12 feet, enough water to float houses and submerge cars. A local sheriff said there's no words to describe the damage that Ian left behind. And take a moment to look at this image on your screen. Now, this is a before and after, and you can see Ian's obvious destruction. Beaches washed away, trees toppled over, pieces of homes scattered everywhere. Now, this is a scene that people woke up to after Ian hit. And now we turn to Gloria Pazmino, who was in Fort Myers the morning after the storm, and shares us what the scene looked like right after Ian hit.
As daylight broke Thursday, it revealed catastrophic devastation in Florida in the wake of Hurricane Ian. Entire neighborhoods underwater, power lines turned down, debris scattered in streets. Residents in Florida trying to pick up the pieces.
If I would have knew it was going to be this bad, I would have got me and my family out ahead of time.
Search and rescue crews from multiple agencies rushing to help people trapped in their homes. But in areas like Sanibel Island, it's impossible to get there by car because the causeway is the only connection to Florida's mainland, and it's now in pieces.
As you can imagine, it is pretty devastating. And what it really does is left the place almost unrecognizable in some places.
But it's not just a coast that was slammed. As the storm turned east, it dumped rain on central Florida, triggering freshwater flooding.
This could be the deadliest hurricane in Florida's history.
As Florida assesses the devastating damage, President Joe Biden saying the federal government will be sending funds for emergency response efforts.
And just as you heard Gloria reporting, Ian's storm surge and strong winds destroyed sections of at least 2 bridges along Florida's southwestern coast. The Sanibel Causeway and the Pine Island Bridge, which connect the mainland and Barrier Islands near Fort Myers. Now, as you can see on your screen, the bridge was washed right away. Both bridges are said to require structural rebuilds, according to Governor Ron DeSantis. A spokesperson for the Coast Guard confirmed that crews had to fly over Sanibel Island on Thursday to airlift some people to safety. And after Ian's entrance in southwestern Florida, the storm slowly crawled northeast across the state. Now, Ian would eventually weaken into a tropical storm very early in the morning on Thursday, September 29th. But although Ian was weakening, devastating flooding and strong winds took place across the central and eastern parts of Florida, bringing another round of flooding and wind damage to areas over 100 miles away from where Ian made landfall. And Ian dumped historic amounts of rain across the entire state. Some areas were under 3 to 4 feet of water. Others had water high enough to cover 1-story houses. Rainfall swept away homes, cars, and boats. Patio furniture was seen rushing down streets filled with water. Rescue crews guided boats and waded through inundated streets to save thousands of Floridians trapped amid flooded homes that were left behind Hurricane Ian. Well, Ian brought central Florida an estimated about 10 to 20 plus inches of rainfall within 48 hours. Flash flood emergencies were issued for many central Florida counties due to the deluge of water. And as you can see on the map there on your screen, there was an area of extreme rainfall, which started in between Fort Myers and Tampa, where Ian made landfall, and extended northeast into Orlando and the Daytona Beach area. And after weakening but still wreaking havoc in Florida, Ian moved out of the Sunshine State and crossed into the Atlantic Ocean, where the storm would regain strength and become a Category 1 hurricane before heading into the southeastern portions of the United States. Now, behind me was the view of Ian as the storm moved through the Atlantic, creating some rough surf. And you can also see the power of Ian as the storm crushed into a pier in Myrtle Beach. Now, Ian was set to make another landfall in South Carolina, but Ian's impacts would also pound the coast of Georgia and North Carolina. Residents in those states dealt with Ian's powerful storm surge and also strong winds and heavy rainfall. And here's a view of Folly Beach, South Carolina, when Ian arrived. Now, Hurricane Ian officially made landfall with winds of 85 miles per hour Friday afternoon on September 30th near Georgetown, South Carolina, a town about 60 miles northeast of Charleston. Now, this was Ian's second landfall in the United States, but the third time the storm made landfall overall. And after seeing the destruction that Ian caused, we want to dive into why hurricanes bring the impacts that they do. Coming up after the break, we'll discuss all of the devastating impacts that hurricanes can bring and also talk more about how they happen. Stick with us.
Well, welcome back to Weather Extra. When tropical cyclones strike a community, it can leave behind an obvious path of destruction due to heavy rain, high winds, storm surge, and even tornadoes. Tonight, we're going to discuss each of these impacts that hurricanes bring and how it all happens. We'll start with flooding caused by heavy rain, something we've experienced plenty of times here in central Texas. Tropical cyclones can often produce widespread torrential rain. Flooding is the major threat for tropical cyclones for people living inland. Rainfall amounts are not directly related to the strength of the tropical cyclone, but rather the speed and the size of the storm. Slower moving, larger storms like Ian produce more rainfall. Parts of Florida saw as much as 20 inches of rain from Ian. Now, Hurricane Harvey, which hit the Houston area back in 2017, dropped up to 60 inches of rain and caused $125 billion in damage. Another threat that people are sometimes not aware of is the ability of a tropical cyclone to produce tornadoes. Tornadoes produced by tropical cyclones are usually relatively weak and short-lived, but they still pose a significant threat. Planes at a local airport, like you're seeing here in this video in Florida, were flipped over and destroyed as a tornado moved through. These tornadoes most often occur in thunderstorms embedded in rain bands well from the center of the hurricane. The majority of tornadoes associated with tropical systems occur in the right front quadrant of a tropical system. This area typically has the best wind shear and instability. The next impact is strong winds, which is one of the most destructive effects from a hurricane. Ian caused catastrophic damage across the southwestern Florida coastline, tearing off roofs from homes and ripping signs straight from the ground. Ian reached max winds of 155 miles per hour before moving on shore. But at the time of landfall, Ian was a strong Category 4 storm with winds of 150 miles per hour. The strongest winds in these storms are located in an area of the storm called the eye wall, right around the eye of a hurricane. And unlike thunderstorms that we see here in central Texas, where you get a quick burst of these severe winds, in hurricanes, these strong winds can last for hours and destroy everything in its path. Now, you may have heard that strong hurricane-force winds are the biggest threat when it's caused by these storms, but it's actually the storm surge. Storm surge causes an extensive property loss from erosion of beaches, damage to coastal habitats, just like we saw with Ian. And for more in-depth explanation of what exactly is storm surge and how it happens, we'll turn it over to meteorologist Sean Bellafiore.
Hurricane Ian made landfall Wednesday with winds of 155 miles per hour, one of the strongest landfalling hurricanes in United States history. And believe it or not, it took the same path almost identically as another hurricane, Hurricane Charley. Both of those systems almost down to the exact same time, making landfall in Cayo Costa. But while Hurricane Charley was a very small and compact hurricane with mostly wind damage, Ian was a larger hurricane causing a lot of storm surge flooding. Storm surge, well, you may have heard that term a bunch. What is it? Well, on a normal day-to-day basis, tides go in, tides come out. But whenever you have a landfalling tropical system, the extra wind from that system pushes the water from the Gulf of Mexico, from the Atlantic, from any body of water inland. And in this case, the storm surge was very high. 3 feet of storm surge is enough to get near coastal communities inundated, but we were talking about 12 feet of storm surge. That is 12 feet above normal high tides and normal low tides. Any sort of tropical storm or hurricane is basically just an area of pressure with counterclockwise winds. And where this system came ashore, notice in Tampa, those were all offshore winds helping to push water out of Tampa Bay, but it was all onshore winds going into Port Charlotte. And that onshore wind is pushing that water to places where it has nowhere to go but to developed communities, cities, businesses, homes, all getting flooded. This is a look at the inundation map of Punta Gorda and also of Port Charlotte. Those red areas up to 9 feet of storm surge plus above ground. Reporting in the studio, Sean Bellafiore, KWTX News 10.
Thanks, Sean. Coming up after the break, we'll take a peek at this week's Degrees of Science. We'll be right back.
Degrees of Science is a series of one-on-one conversations that dive into the exciting, insightful, informative, and entertaining world of weather, science, climate, STEM education, and how it affects you. In this week's episode of Degrees of Science, we sit down and talk one-on-one with Michaela McCown, an assistant professor of environmental science at McLennan Community College. She's also the chair for the City of Waco's Sustainable Resource Practices Advisory Board, and in her free time, she trains for the Ironman. In our conversation, we talk about why sustainability is so important and some practical ways to be more sustainable in our everyday lives. Here's a peek into our conversation.
Sustainability at its core is all about using resources in a way that it allows for future generations to use those same resources. So when we look at our resource consumption now, we're doing so in a way that's going to be detrimental to future generations, whether that's water consumption or air quality, you know, we're basically causing air quality to decline, that it's already harming humans. And so sustainability comes back to, how do we reduce our impact on the planet? How do we be better stewards of resources so that way we can continue using them hundreds, thousands of years down the road? And so what that looks like for individuals might be a little bit different based on, you know, where you are in life and what resources you use. You probably have heard the 3 R's, right? Reduce, reuse, recycle.
Yes.
And it really comes back to that. So first and foremost, how can you reduce your use of some type of resource? So for example, how can you maybe when you go to the grocery store, do you need a bag, right? If you're just getting 2 items, can you carry those out? If you don't even grab a bag, that's reducing the need for that resource. So that is going to allow that resource to kind of have a longer life cycle. So let's say you do need a bag, because usually when I go to the store, I might go in for one thing and I come out with like 10.
Can't carry it all.
Yeah, I can't quite carry it all. So I bring reusable bags, and then on the rare occasion that I forget my reusable bags, if I have to get a grocery sack that's single use, I'll figure out how can I recycle it or reuse it. So can I use it as a little waste bin container, or can I use it to take you know, my stuff to work for lunch? So how can I put that bag to use again? So that's that reuse and recycle component.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the 3 R's, the reduce, reuse, recycle, because recycle is actually the last of the 3 steps. And so I think when people sometimes think about it, they think, oh, that's the first step, I'll recycle it, it's out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. But really it's the impacts before we get to that recycling stage that can make the most difference.
Exactly, and recycling isn't 100% efficient, particularly when we're looking at the plastic recycling market now. And so a lot of the other plastics end up going to the landfill.
And I didn't know that.
Yeah, so even kind of knowing those components, and when you look at a plastic water bottle, most of those aren't made from recycled plastic. Most plastic that we are recycling goes into creating other items like clothing or the plastic benches that you see on playgrounds. So they kind of go into a completely different purpose. And so there's still virgin plastic being made to create those water bottles, you know, that you're pulling off the shelf. So just kind of being aware of those things is really important. And again, thinking, all right, how can I reduce my use of these, you know, reuse them if I've purchased them or obtained them, and then recycle them.
Degrees of Science conversations are just getting started. There's definitely a lot more in the weeks to come. You can catch this full interview and other conversations about weather, science, and how it affects us by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to KWTX.com/degrees of science. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Weather Extra. Check this out. This is incredible footage of Hurricane Ian all the way up from outer space. Now, this was the view of Hurricane Ian as the International Space Station flew over the storm last week. And you could see the massive size of Ian swirling around in the ocean. At the time, Ian was growing stronger and stronger as it moved through the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico. And we also had another fascinating look of Ian. This time, it's from an airplane. Hurricane hunter Nick Underwood shared this video showing us on the ground what it's like to fly into a hurricane. Hurricane hunters fly into these tropical systems to collect data that forecasters use to predict where storms like Ian will go next, and also how strong they will be when they get there. And here's the view of the hurricane hunters entering Ian's eye, or the center of the storm. Now, inside the eye of the storm, the weather is calm and you can see clear blue skies, and the sun is even shining above. But around the eye wall, storm clouds are towering as the hurricane spins around. That is a pretty terrifying thing. That's also called a stadium effect. When you see those clouds build out like that, again, that is just a beautiful image of Ian in that eye wall. Now, Ian will likely go down as one of the strongest and deadliest hurricanes to have ever hit the Florida coastline. Ian's strength at landfall tied for the 5th strongest hurricane to strike when the U.S. Measured here by wind speed. Now, winds at the time of landfall were 150 miles per hour. We're sending our thoughts and prayers to all of those who are impacted in this storm and who have may lost some loved ones in this natural disaster. That's all we have for you tonight. Have a great week, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.